The clink of silverware, the scent of dry-aged steak, and the dull hum of privileged laughter filled the chandelier-lit dining hall of the Willows Country Club. Every seat at the enormous mahogany table was filled, except one.
Mine.
I stood near the entrance, invisible to most, except for my husband Ethan, who gave me a slight nod as I approached. His expression didn't betray what was coming. He was cool, almost too calm. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. Ethan's father, Charles Monroe, sat at the head of the table, stern, old money, the kind of man whose silence could clear a room. This was his anniversary dinner. 35 years married to Margaret, the society matriarch who always judged my earrings, my lipstick, and the fact that I worked. They didn't say it aloud. They didn't have to. I'd barely taken a step forward when Ethan's younger sister, Brielle, tossed her champagne-colored curls and let out a loud, staged laugh. "Oh, look who finally showed up," she said with theatrical disbelief. "Sorry, Ava. I thought this was a family dinner." I kept walking. "She doesn't deserve a seat at this table," Brielle added, looking around for support. "She's just a nobody with makeup and heels." The laughter that followed wasn't spontaneous. It was designed, tight, complicit, cruel. Margaret smirked into her wineglass. One of the cousins actually clapped. I didn't flinch. I reached the chair next to Ethan and calmly pulled it out. But before I sat down, Ethan placed his hand gently on mine. Then he stood. He reached inside his blazer and took out a plain manila folder.
Click.
That single sound of the brass clip opening quieted the room more than a thunderclap. Everyone watched as Ethan took out 3 printed pages, neatly stacked. He didn't smile. He didn't scold. He just said, "Before anyone else decides to humiliate my wife tonight, there's something you all should hear." Brielle raised a brow. "What, your wedding vows?" I was there. They were. "No," he interrupted, eyes on the paper. "This is the signed acquisition agreement. Effective last Monday, Ava is now the majority shareholder and acting CEO of Monroe and Cole International." Silence, like a spell, had snapped mid-chant. Someone dropped a fork. I think it was Cousin Preston. My eyes scanned the table. Margaret blinked fast, trying to process the words. Charles's lips twitched, but never moved. And Brielle? She froze, wineglass still in hand, eyes wide, smile slowly collapsing like a paper tower in the rain. I sat down. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to take my seat at the table. The silence didn't last long. Charles finally leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" His tone was low and deliberate, the same tone he'd used the night he told Ethan not to marry me. "She's not one of us," he'd said. "She won't survive in this world." I didn't look at Charles. I looked at Brielle. Her smile was gone now, her hands fidgeting with the stem of her wineglass. It was the first time I'd seen her unsure of herself. The woman who once told me to stay in my lane was realizing I had bulldozed right through hers. Ethan handed the contract to his father. Page 3. Signature line.
"You signed it, Dad."
"Maybe you should read what you sign." Margaret opened her mouth like she was about to object, but Charles held up a hand. She knew better. "I sign dozens of deals a month," Charles said. "If this is real, I want to know how the hell this happened." I spoke for the first time that evening.
Calm. Clear.
"I bought out Hanover Group," I said. "They quietly held 41% of Monroe and Cole for 5 years. You used them to shield against federal tax audits. You never thought anyone would go looking." Charles's jaw tightened. "I spent 6 months in silent acquisition talks." I continued. "I used a separate name. I kept it clean. And once Hanover folded, they handed me the controlling interest." "You don't have that kind of money," Brielle snapped, her voice louder than she meant it to be. You do makeup tutorials, for God's sake." Laughter again, but this time nervous.
Forced.
Even the waiters paused, unsure of what to do. I smiled, but not kindly. "I built a media company from scratch," I said. While you were hosting wine and cheese pop-ups and spending your dad's money on fake businesses, I was creating actual value. Monetized content, distribution deals, syndication. I bought out 3 investor groups over the past 2 years. Quietly, intentionally. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Your father's board never saw me coming. Margaret's face had gone pale. This is a joke, she muttered. This can't be real. People like you don't end up on top. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I reached into my purse and slid a copy of the transition letter down the table, addressed to all existing Monroe and Cole board members. Official. Stamped. Sealed. Ethan remained standing, his hand on my shoulder. You embarrassed her for years. At family dinners, company functions, private parties. Called her names. Ignored her. Told her she'd never matter. He looked directly at his father. She's your boss now. Charles didn't say a word. He just stared at the contract in his hand, realizing the ink was dry, realizing the old game was over. And across the table, Brielle's face shifted from contempt to fear. Because she'd mocked the woman who now had the power to decide her paycheck. The dinner was no longer about Charles and Margaret's anniversary. No one toasted. No one clapped. The room had turned cold, sharp with tension, full of eyes that couldn't look at me for too long. They didn't know what to do now that the woman they called just a girl with lipstick was sitting in power. Brielle broke first. You think this changes anything? She hissed, voice lowered but shaking. You'll always be beneath us. I didn't flinch. Maybe, I said softly, but you'll still need to schedule time to pitch me next quarter. She blinked. Ethan squeezed my shoulder gently before sitting beside me again. It was strange how quickly the dynamic shifted. For years, I'd been the outsider at every event. Their jokes, their side comments, their dismissals. They'd labeled me the PR wife. The one who smiled for photos and stayed quiet at meetings.
But now?
Now Margaret wouldn't even meet my eyes. Charles hadn't touched a steak. And Brielle was gripping her napkin like it might help her hold onto the family name. Still, the victory wasn't as clean as it looked. There was a storm behind my calm expression. Because none of this came easy. None of this came without cost. 3 years ago, I sat on the cracked leather couch of our one-bedroom apartment in Queens, crying quietly while Ethan reviewed our credit statements. Back then, I was hustling freelance makeup work, weddings, low-budget music videos, off-Broadway productions. Building something, yes, but barely sleeping. We had $1,700 left in savings. And a missed rent notice taped to the door. That night, while I scrubbed lipstick stains off my brushes, I told Ethan, they'll never let me forget where I came from. So I won't let them see me coming. He nodded once. What do you need? I still remember the sound of the light bulb buzzing overhead. How tired we were. How afraid. I need time, I whispered. And silence. So, I built a shell company, Avasi Holdings. Registered it in Vermont under a different LLC chain. Used that to buy 18% of Hanover. Waited.
Grew.
Created 2 YouTube channels, both faceless, but built on my strategies, beauty, lifestyle, storytelling. They grew fast. Then came brand deals. Then affiliate networks. Then sponsorship contracts. Then content licenses. I monetized my skill where they'd mocked it. I weaponized the very thing they looked down on. All while attending those family dinners in silence. I played their game. Smiled. Took the insults. Pretended to misunderstand. But I wasn't confused. I was calculating. I was watching them bleed money on private jets, on failed product launches, on hiring friends and cousins instead of talent. Monroe and Cole was leaking, and no one in that family noticed. Except me. Back in the dining hall, a waiter tried to pour me more wine. I stopped him with a gentle nod. I'm fine, thank you. The server looked surprised but grateful. I saw it. I always saw it. Because I used to be her. Brielle leaned over her plate. This is war, she muttered under her breath. You just declared war. No, I said. War was when you told the HR department to ghost my calls during the charity gala last year. When you spread that rumor about me leaking reports to the press. When you laughed after sending me the fake invite to the shareholders mixer. She went still. I'm just responding. By the time dessert was served, the table had splintered into uncomfortable, fragmented conversation. No one brought up the company. No one dared. Even Charles was unusually quiet, and that silence alone carried more weight than any raised voice. I watched them, all of them, squirm in their designer outfits. Forks clinked against half-eaten soufflés, but the taste had left the room the moment the contract touched the table. Margaret finally found her voice again. She folded her napkin slowly, precisely, like she was trying to regain control through something as fragile as linen. "Let's not make a scene, dear," she said to me, her tone syrupy with condescension. "This is still our anniversary dinner." I tilted my head. "And I let you finish your entree before dropping the news. That's more than you've ever extended to me." Margaret's mouth twitched. I saw the rage just beneath the surface. But I wasn't interested in trading barbs anymore. Not with her. Not tonight. Charles cleared his throat. "If this is real," he said again, the words thick in his throat, "then I expect an emergency board meeting tomorrow. You don't take over a legacy like this with a stunt." "No," I said. "You don't. Which is why I won't be attending tomorrow's board meeting." The whole table blinked. "Excuse me?" Charles said, low and firm. "I scheduled the real meeting last week. With the executive team. You'll receive the minutes and transition agenda Monday. Don't worry. It's thorough." Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching quietly. He wasn't just backing me, he was with me. They couldn't figure that out. They kept wondering if he was just humoring me, if this was some emotional phase. But they were wrong. He'd walked beside me through every late-night phone call, every rejected pitch, every burnout. This wasn't just my win. It was ours. Brielle burst out laughing, sharp and bitter. "This is insane. You think you can just walk in and take over one of New York's oldest family-run corporations like it's a fashion blog?" I finally turned fully to her. "You think this is about social media and lip gloss? You've never even opened the quarterly reports, have you?" She rolled her eyes. "Why would I?" I nodded.
Exactly.
"That's why I'm here." Let me rewind for a second. Brielle wasn't just a brat with a trust fund. She was a cunning one. The type who knew how to wield gossip like a scalpel and spin social connections into influence. But she underestimated me the moment she called me a nobody. She didn't know that I spent 2 years paying attention to every mistake she made with the Monroe and Cole marketing division. Every failed influencer collab. Every underperforming campaign. Every event that cost more than it earned. I documented it all. Quietly. Patiently. And when I bought Hanover Group, I wasn't just buying shares. I was collecting leverage. Brielle's signature was on 6 unauthorized expense approvals. And guess what? They were all in that folder Ethan dropped on the table. After dinner, people began to scatter. Awkward goodbyes muttered as if they weren't sure how to leave without walking directly into the spotlight of shame. The cliques that usually formed, the women gossiping by the powder room, the men talking stocks near the bar, didn't form tonight. They were fractured, just like the empire that used to belong to the Monroes. Charles stood at the head of the table and looked right at me. "This isn't over, Ava," he said, gravel in his voice. "No," I replied. "It's just beginning." He stared at me, eyes narrowed, then slowly turned and walked out of the dining hall, Margaret clinging to his arm like a lifeline. Only Brielle stayed behind. Her heels clicked as she walked up to me. No crowd. No witnesses. Just 2 women standing at the edge of a legacy built on entitlement. "You humiliated us," she whispered. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. "No, Brielle," I said quietly. "I replaced you. That's what CEOs do." And I left her standing there, alone. 3 days later, I sat at the head of the boardroom table, Charles's old chair. The Monroe and Cole headquarters was built to intimidate. Marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown. A brushed metal logo mounted behind me that once defined old power.
Now?
Now it was mine. Across the table sat the remaining senior board members, each of them flipping through the folders that had just landed in front of them. My official audit report, complete with forensic analysis, shareholder breakdowns, and projected Q4 restructuring. I didn't waste time on small talk. This company was bleeding. I began. You knew it. You looked the other way. I won't. No one spoke. But eyes darted nervously as they skimmed the documents. Some jaws tightened. One of them, Dale Hargrove, former VP of Operations, looked visibly pale. Page 13, I said. That's the unreconciled expense trail tied to internal consulting projects under Brielle Monroe's oversight. A few heads turned toward Brielle, who sat rigid at the end of the table. No power now. No wine. Just silence. 6 figures, I continued, diverted to ghost accounts for work that was never done, including a contract routed through a shell company registered in Connecticut under her college roommate's name. I paused. And one under Charles Monroe's name. Now it was silent. The kind of silence that leaves your ears ringing. Charles authorized it, I said. And it violates 3 SEC compliance regulations. I looked down the line. I could have kept this hidden, but I didn't come here to play their game. I looked Brielle straight in the eyes. I came here to end it. That afternoon, I met with Charles in his private office, more for formality than necessity. He sat by the window, a half-empty scotch on the side table, his expression unreadable. You really want to take everything? He asked quietly. I didn't want to take anything, I said. I wanted respect. I wanted fairness. I wanted to belong. You made it clear there was no seat for me, so I built my own table. Charles ran a hand down his face. You'll learn this business isn't about pride. It's about survival. Then it's a good thing I've survived worse, I said, standing. He didn't look up.
He didn't argue.
I left. The board voted that evening. Brielle was terminated, officially cited for financial misconduct. The press release was dry, legal, surgical. The kind of language that hides years of venom behind phrases like internal restructuring and personal decision to step away. Charles was moved into an emeritus role. No power. No vote. A title with no teeth. Margaret tried to call me. I never picked up. Ethan and I walked out of the building that night together, hand in hand. As we stepped into the waiting town car, he kissed my forehead and said, You didn't just take your seat at the table. You rewrote where the table stood. I didn't reply. I just looked out the window as the lights of Manhattan blurred past. Because deep down I knew the truth. They didn't lose because I got lucky. They lost because they forgot something critical. Quiet women don't stay quiet forever.